It was very possible that I die in any moment, either in the protests in the street. I came from a very conservative community in northeast Syria, the region where ISIS, one of the ugliest and worst organizations, emerged. And here I am. I learned that it's hard to make change in the Middle East because we wanted progressive change, and unfortunately what we see now is regressive change. All the focus is only on Gaza and what's happening in Gaza, and meanwhile the media is missing very important stories. We don't see any coverage for the war in Sudan. We don't see any coverage for the conflict in Ethiopia.
When we think about the isolation or lack of interest from the United States in Africa, in the Middle East, could we see that as a potential turn of events where the world becomes more dangerous?
Less American influence, less American footprint means worse, not better. If Israel now is weaker, if Israel is not supported by the United States, we're literally going to see a genocide against the Israeli people and against the Jews, but also against the Muslims and the Arabs and the Christians who live in Israel, because Israel is going to be attacked from all sides. More oppression and more massacres against civilians who refuses the control of Iran-backed militias in the region.
What is one truth that you wish people knew about what's happening in the Middle East?
So,
hello everyone, and welcome to this very special edition of Through Conversations podcast, where we explore the truth through conversations with the most brilliant minds. And today in front of me is a brilliant mind indeed. Thank you for reaching out, Hadeel Oueis, and thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
I'm honored, and it's a special interview because we will discuss many pressing topics that are happening around and across the Middle East and the world. You being a foreign affairs analyst and an expert, and also an editor-in-chief in Jusoor News. I hope I'm saying that right.
Yes, correct.
But before we get into all of that, Hadeel, I would love to hear on your trajectory. I know that you were you appeared on a peace protest back when you were 18 years old in Syria, and I would love to hear what happened there. What happened in the peace protests?
Yes, Alex. So, as many viewers may know, in 2011, an uprising started in Syria. People in Syria started to call for freedom, for change. And I was one of the people who participated in that uprising. I was one of the few first people to get arrested by the Assad regime in Syria for protesting peacefully in the streets in Syria, calling for change. We did not call for regime change. We wanted some sort of change in the system. We wanted some margin of freedom. According to many people who know Syria, Syria was known to be the North Korea of the Middle East. So we hoped for change, but unfortunately, a few years later, the uprising, the peaceful uprising, turned into a civil war. I was arrested due to my participation in the uprising. I ended up in jail in Syria for almost 40 days. It was tough. It was hard. I was 19-year-old back then, and I was released later on, as many people, because the government started to arrest a lot of people, thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and then at some point they hoped that by releasing some protesters, releasing some activists, things will calm down in the streets and the uprising will stop. It did not, but I was lucky. I got released. And when I was out of jail, Syria was different. Uprising, protests in the street continued, but also there were a lot of oppression, a lot of fear in Syria, and that fear was always there in my mind, in my heart. I was very afraid to stay in Syria, so I ended up leaving the country in December 2011, and here I am. I'm in the United States right now. I went through many countries before I arrived to the US, which I made it to in 2012.
Wow. Hadeel, how did that experience, of course, it's a very tough experience for sure, but how did that experience in itself and what you were witnessing, of course, being raised and being born in Syria and then having to leave your country and also being arrested by your own government, how did that experience shape your perspective, not only in Syria, but also in terms of how you see the Middle East and also how you see democracy, freedoms, and also the lack of discussion in terms of all of these topics?
Yes, of course, the experience of participating in this public movement in Syria and then getting arrested shaped who I am today, what I'm doing for career, and who I am as a mother, as a wife, as someone who lives here in the United States. It changed me a lot. First, I learned that we are tough. Human beings are tough, and we can survive. We can go through a lot and then survive and come stronger out of all of that. It was very possible that I die in any moment, and what I went through, either in the protests in the streets, because there were firing on the protesters. I made it. I didn't die. I didn't die in jail. A lot of people die in jails in Syria. A lot of Syrians died while trying to get out of the country. They died on the borders between Syria and Turkey. Some of them died in the sea while trying to make it out of the region. I survived a lot. I survived living in Egypt for 4 months as a young lady who was almost 19, and then I went to Switzerland. So I'm tough because of that experience. I'm strong. I know that we can do a lot to change our communities, to change our lives, to change our fate. I came from a very conservative community in northeast Syria, the region where ISIS, one of the ugliest and worst organizations, emerged. And here I am enjoying my freedom here in the United States. I was able, with the hundreds of thousands of Syrians, to change maybe the fate of Syria. It's not for better, unfortunately, because a lot of things happened besides the uprising. But we were able to change. Syria after 2011 is not like Syria before 2011. But also, in general, I learned that it's hard to make change in the Middle East, because we wanted change for better. We wanted progressive change, and unfortunately what we see now is regressive change. A lot of Islamist groups emerged, tried to hijack the uprising and tried to be the champions of the uprising and calls for change in Syria. So I learned that it's really hard to make progressive change in the Middle East, but I also learned that there are a lot of amazing individuals in our region who made it when they got out of that region. But unfortunately, inside the region, because of the regimes, because of the system in place, because of the foreign policies for the big countries like the United States, like Russia, like European countries, there is not big tendencies to see progressive change in the region.
Wow. Yeah, it's a lot to unpack there, Hadeel. Thank you for those comments. And, there's a lot of questions that emerge. First of all, I would really love to hear, you mentioned that we're witnessing a regressive change from 2011 until today, not only, I guess, in Syria, but you're seeing this pattern across the Middle East. You're seeing it not only in the Israel-Gaza war that we're witnessing, but of course, when you reached out, you mentioned two other conflicts that are happening, one in Yemen and one in Sudan. Those two are not being discussed that much as we should, and your work should be more shed a light onto, because you're working on to revealing those truths. But I'm curious to know what are some of these themes that you're witnessing in terms of the regressive pattern. Why is it that the Middle East is going back to those themes of oppression and control and lacks of freedom?
Yes, so the hope at the beginning of the Arab Spring was to have more freedoms in the region. We did not get the freedoms. We got more oppression because the groups that posed themselves as the challenger for the former regimes and former systems were unfortunately worst, as corrupt as the regimes, maybe more radical than the previous regimes. And when the world watched what was happening in a country like Libya or Syria or even Yemen, they saw that the alternative for the former regimes are worst. They are branches of Al-Qaeda, groups affiliated and related with ISIS, affiliated with the IRGC, the Iranian militias. So all of that was happening, and there were conflicts between these two groups, the former regimes and the new opposition groups, activists, young people, students like me. When we hoped for change, we were marginalized by the regime, of course, but also by the opposition. So we had no space in this conflict that was taking place, and everything turned into a conflict and civil war between the new opposition and the former regimes, and that of course caused big damage in the infrastructure of the country, in the economy. So things became worse than how they used to be before this uprising, because the economy got worse. The conflict created very huge waves of immigrants and also displaced people. Until today, millions of Syrians moved from city to another city, escaping the war, escaping the destruction. And that's many people, like now in Jusoor, which is an Arabic media news outlet related to the Center for Peace Communication. We are reporting stories from northern Syria, where people have been living in tents for years now. Tents are their homes because they were displaced due to the war, and so this is why things became worse. So now we have the same oppression, we have the same systems in place, but also with more poverty, more destruction for the economy and infrastructure.
And what causes, you've worked as a journalist and you're trying to reveal all of these truths that are happening across the Middle East, for all society at large. What makes you concerned about the fact that none of us are really tuned into all of these situations, that the focal point is just one war, when there are so many other catastrophes happening and some unresolved that have been happening? For example, you mentioned the one in Syria that has been, since 2011, when everything happened, people still live in tents, and there's not a lot of news covering that. And so what makes you think, first of all, why is this the case, that most of us are not outraged, going into college campuses here in the US, protesting about all of these things? And on the other hand, why do you think only just one of those conflicts gets all of the attention?
Yes, unfortunately, as someone who have been in the media here in the US and also in the Middle East for almost 10 years now, I see the way the local Arabic networks or even the international networks, the way they cover the news is like how makeup trends emerge. It's all about trend. There is now war in Ukraine. All the eyes are on Ukraine. All the focus is on Ukraine. Of course, today the war in Gaza, because it relates to the interests of many decision makers, foreign policy issues, foreign lobbying groups. all the focus is only on Gaza and what's happening in Gaza. And meanwhile, the media is missing very important stories, very for real, like bloody wars are being totally ignored, like what's happening today in Sudan. The number of people that are being killed in Sudan is bigger than the number of the people are dying in Gaza. But despite of that, we don't see any coverage for the war in Sudan. We don't see any coverage for the conflict in Ethiopia. There is also a bloody civil war today taking place in Ethiopia. No one is covering that. The Houthi attacks on the naval routes, for example, are catching some attention from the media because they are attacking the international naval routes, and there is this worry on the international economy. But nobody talks about the Houthi crimes against the civilians inside Yemen. The Houthis are killing a lot of civilians inside Yemen. They are continuously attacking other cities inside Yemen, causing big damage. Nobody talks about that, so the media is dealing with the news only as a trend. They focus all the time on one issue, ignoring other issues. And when the media is ignoring that, also State Department here in the United States ignore it. All the people who are in charge of foreign affairs in the powerful countries, powerful capitals, are ignoring it. And this is why the challenges, the suffering of people in marginalized communities and forgotten countries like Sudan, which is an African country, are having more and more suffering due to this fact.
Hadeel, can you help me expand upon more on the situation in Sudan for our listeners maybe who are not that close to it? What's really happening there? Who are being persecuted? Who are the ones persecuting? And what are some of the dynamics that you're seeing, happening literally in the field in Sudan?
So Sudan is a very important country. It's an African country, but also it's an Arab country. There were always been some sort of discrimination against Sudan and the Sudanese people from the Arab communities because, as the viewers know, not all the Arabs are Africans. Sudanese people are Africans, and there were a lot of discrimination against Sudanese workers, Sudanese people who worked in other Arab countries. And also Sudan suffered from wars for decades, and then 10 years ago, things started to calm down. The former administration, Trump administration, also before that, Obama administration, and then Biden administration, put some diplomatic efforts to lift sanctions from Sudan to improve the American relations with Sudan and start new chapter in the U.S.-Sudanese relations. But all of a sudden, all of that stopped because a new civil war erupted in Sudan. It became very bloody almost a year and a half ago from now. And the two groups that are fighting are two militias who are claiming governance, trying to control Sudan resources. Sudan is rich in resources, especially gold. And the people who are most affected by this war are women and kids. There is a lot of violence that's taking place in Sudan against women. Thousands of women were raped in Sudan from the militias. Thousands of kids were killed only during the last year, when all what we used to hear in the news is about Gaza and about the war in Gaza. We saw a lot of exaggeration, a lot of lies in the news about the war in Gaza and what Israel is doing in Gaza, while we don't see any light being shed on the war in Sudan and the suffering of the people in Sudan. Jusoor was able to go to the women camps in Sudan and talk to them, hear from them, take exclusive interviews, exclusive coverage for what's happening in Sudan. And we heard very, very unfortunate news and unfortunate stories about what was happening. And recently our story in Jusoor made it to Fox News. And this is what we're trying to make in Jusoor. We're trying to bring local voices, unique stories that are very important, but they are very ignored also by the media. We try to make it viewed by as much people as possible in the Arab world, but also try to bring it to the American audience and to the American media.
Wow, yes, and I'm going to do all that I can to also try to spread this interview and this conversation, also your work at Jusoor News with my audience as well. And Hadeel, I'm curious to know, you've had the like you say, you had a chance to speak with people on the field, literally women in Sudan, and also within your coverage that emerged from at Fox News Digital, you said that the Sudanese people are questioning why the world turns a blind eye to what's happening in Sudan, and are focusing just on fixating on the smaller conflict at Gaza. And this is not to minimize what's happening, it's a war nonetheless, but still that sentiment of, Sudanese people feeling left out. So what were you hearing about the Sudanese people specifically? What are they asking for in terms of the international community? And also, what are some of the most pressure points that they're living? Of course, the war and the raping, those are tragedies, but I would love to hear more insights into what's happening there.
So what we heard from the people, we talked to a lot of people, civilians. We talked to educators in Sudan. We talked to women who were displaced, and they think that ignoring the tragedy in Sudan is leading to ignoring it also by decision makers. They think that when a story, something is happening in Africa or the Middle East is underlined, is in the international media, this is also pushing the decision makers to do something about it. They believe that the United States has leverage. They think that Washington has a lot of tools to pressure both parties in Sudan to stop the fighting, to stop this violence against women, to respect the international measures, to respect the UN and the human rights. But when the media is ignoring what's happening in Sudan, when the news in Sudan is not in the newspapers that the decision makers are reading every day, no one will know, no one will care. There will be no popular or public attention or interest in pushing also the politicians to do anything for Sudan. They think that bringing the attention to any conflict that's happening in the world requires political interests, requires money, campaigns, media campaigns that they know that it costs a lot of money in a capital like here, like Washington, D.C., and they know that there is no one who is interested in putting money to make the people, make the media cover the war in Sudan. And this is what makes them feel very desperate about the future of their country and the future of this conflict.
And how do you see the future of this conflict in Sudan? How do you see, of course, the most plausible scenario is, unfortunately, no one or few people paying attention. Of course, we're trying to do that, the most that we can to prevent that. But how do you see the Sudan conflict, emerging and unfolding in the future?
I think it's going to a more dangerous place because while Washington is doing nothing to de-escalate in Sudan, other countries are seeing an opportunity in Sudan to fill the vacuum that the United States is leaving behind in this strategic and important country. Today, Russia and China are very interested in expanding their presence in Africa. And Sudan is a great place to put their foot in because there is no American influence now in Sudan. Russia, China, through their also Iranian allies, are supporting some parties in Sudan. Now the Iranian drones that we saw with Russia in Ukraine are being used in Sudan. So this is making things more dangerous in Sudan. Of course, to begin with, for the Sudanese people, for the Sudanese civilians who are suffering, but also on the long term, I see it a very bad situation for the U.S. national interests and the U.S. interests in Africa.
It is becoming increasingly difficult to access truthful, nuanced, and wide-ranging perspectives in terms of the truth we consume and the information we consume. It is increasingly difficult to know what's truth and what's propaganda. Tangle News is an independent, non-partisan politics newsletter. They summarize the best arguments from across the political spectrum on the news of the day, and I've hosted the founder of Tangle News, Isaac Sol, for a conversation on how they engage with their own pieces of information, how they challenge their own ideas, and how does Isaac himself evaluate what's truth and what's not truth, and what to share with their audience. I've always found this newsletter the most balanced and also the most truthful in terms of understanding the political environment we live in and the implications of it for our society. I recommend you to take a look at it with a link in the notes below, and also you can reach out to me or you can reach out to the team so we can put you in contact with Tangle and they can help you set out your account. With that, I'm proud to be partnered with Tangle to share that with you. Could we think about the isolation or lack of interest from the United States in Africa, in the Middle East? Could we see that as a potential turn of events where the world becomes more dangerous? Do you see the U.S. isolating itself as a potential, cause of more wars in that region?
Absolutely, and we Syrians know it more than anyone else in the Middle East, probably. Maybe some communities in the Middle East who suffered from the American wars, like the Iraqis, are excited to see Russia and China expanding their influence in their country on the expense of the United States presence. But we, as Syrians, we saw what does a Russian influence mean in our country, because when Russia entered the war in Syria and supported the Assad regime, we started to see more casualties, we started to see more suffering. Russia intervention was absolutely for worse for us as Syrian civilians, and Syria was the beginning of a new chapter for Russia's influence in the Middle East, and we see it from there now growing and expanding to other countries in the region, like Libya, like the Yemeni issue. Although Russia is very busy in the war in Ukraine, it's growing meanwhile also its influence in the Middle East. So I think when the United States and the former three administrations started to talk about focusing on China, on the competition with China, always this idea was accompanied with and coming with the idea of abandoning the Middle East and getting away of the Middle East and stopping what some politicians call the endless wars, either in the Middle East or in Afghanistan. And we forgot that this is a very strategic and important region that is an important and key tool now in the hands of China and Russia to win in this competition with the United States.
Wow. And it's interesting because it's kind of we're living in a weird time where here in the U.S., we're seeing all of these college campuses against the United States, against Israel, and chanting for intifada and chanting for all of these things, and for really essentially just saying that the U.S. should step out of the equation. And what's interesting on my perspective, Hadeel, is when I listen to you and you're, echoing the voice of the Syrian people saying, Russian intervention was worse than anything, and so for me the confusion here is, or rather the question for you is, how does it feel, or what do you think about this dissonance that we have here in the US, where we're chanting all of these themes in US college campuses, and also for example, we can also touch on Yemen, but one of the interesting things here is that Egyptian civilians who are suffering from all of what's happening in the Red Sea are supporting less of the Houthis than in U.S. college campuses. And all of these themes that, here in the U.S. we believe we have the truth, but first of all, we're not from the region, and second of all, we're not there. And so how do you make sense of all of these things, Hadeel?
Yes, I think for civilians in the region, for the future of this region, less American influence, less American footprint means worse, not better. Those who are asking now for the U.S. to stop supporting Israel, they don't see the realities on the ground. Today, Israel is under fire from the Lebanese Hezbollah group, and Hezbollah has tons and tons of weapons on the borders of Israel, and they are attacking Israel not only from Lebanon but also from my country, from Syria. In Syria, Iran has very big military bases right now because the Assad regime is the closest ally for Iran as a government, not only a militia. In Iraq, they have allies, they are militias. They have allies in Lebanon, which are militias, same for Yemen. But in Syria, the ally is a government that's controlling everything in the country, and that's giving up very important and strategic military bases for Iran. So if Israel now is weaker, if Israel is not supported by the United States, we're literally going to see a genocide against the Israeli people and against the Jews, but also against the Muslims and the Arabs and the Christians who live in Israel, because Israel is going to be attacked from all sides. It's going to be attacked from Lebanon, from Syria, and also from Gaza, from the remaining Hamas militants, and also as many know, Yemen, the Houthis are trying to attack Israel. Iraqi militias are trying to attack Israel. So saying stop the support for Israel is literally allowing all these groups to attack Israel and to commit genocides against Israeli people. And if these groups, let's say, are powerful to commit genocide against the Israeli people, they're not going to stop there, because this is not only what they're doing. The Iran-backed militias also committed horrible massacres against my people, the Syrian people, by this alliance, by the Assad regime, and by and Iran and its militias. They killed hundreds and thousands of people. A lot of civilians lost their lives on the hands of Hezbollah. And when Hezbollah is more powerful, that means all of Lebanon is under control of Hezbollah, more than what we see now. Only yesterday, a journalist that we know and that we interviewed in Jusoor was beaten almost to death by Hezbollah militias inside Lebanon for criticizing Hezbollah's attacks against Israel, because the majority of the Lebanese people, they don't want Hezbollah to take them to a war with Israel. So less powerful, less strong Israel means more strong militias, a genocide against the Israeli people, but also more oppression and more massacres against civilians who refuses the control of Iran-backed militias in the region.
Wow, it's a sobering thought, and it's crazy to think that we are contemplating those potential scenarios where, in fact, none of us, or a few of us rather, at least in U.S. college campuses and across the media, really know what's happening. And I can see that you have the pulse of what's happening in the region and what the consequences might be. And so, Hadeel, I'm curious to know, how do you see, of course, if Israel is weaker and, Israelis and Jewish people across the world are being persecuted, but how do you see this rising of autocracies and terrorist groups and militias affect other marginalized groups? Who are other groups that might be in trouble besides Israelis?
Look, Alex, what many people in the U.S. May not know is that there is big Arab community that wish to see Israel destroy Hezbollah, wish to see Israel destroy the Assad regime and Iran-backed militias in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen. Because if you look at the numbers, if you look at the statistics and the numbers of casualties and victims who lost their lives on the hands of Iran-backed militias in the region, they are not Israelis, they are not Jews, they are Arabs and Muslims. Hezbollah killed hundreds of thousands of Syrians because they tried to change the regime who is an ally for Hezbollah. Same for the Houthis. Until today, Houthis are committing horrible massacres against the Yemeni people, the Yemeni civilians, civilians in the north or in the south. Same for the situation in Iraq. Since the last few years, many activists in Iraq were kidnapped and killed by Iran-backed militias. Every group, every community that tried to challenge Iran's control for the Arab countries is a victim for Iran and its militias. And when Iran-backed militias are stronger, not only Israel is going to lose people and lose civilians and have casualties, but also all these countries, because under the slogan and under the excuse of fighting Israel, Hezbollah, the Assad regime, Iran-backed militias everywhere are oppressing their own people. And believe me, a lot of people in Lebanon, Syria, all these countries are waiting and wishing to see the United States and Israel do something to eliminate the power of these groups.
Wow, and it's difficult because, in those countries it is very difficult to express yourself. Like what happened with you, Hadeel. You went to a protest and you were arrested, and so not a lot of people have access to those perspectives, unfortunately, but hearing you say that makes, it's encouraging, because sometimes it is felt that not a lot of people across the world understand what's really happening, and that frustration arises when everything is mediated through lenses of the media and biases. And so, what is one truth that you wished people knew about what's happening in the Middle East? What is one truth that people should have in mind always when they look on this region, and not only in the West, but across the world?
I think it's very important that people know what I just said, that many, like the opinion in the Arab world is not just one opinion. Israel is our enemy, and Israel is an occupier. Israel is killing Arabs, killing Muslims. This is not the opinion in the Arab world. Not all the Arab people consider Israel to be the enemy. Each Arab country has its significance, has its differences, and has its different challenge and different struggles. The main struggle and main issue for the Syrian people is their own issues, their displacement, their suffering, the casualties that they lost by the Assad regime, Russia, and Hezbollah. They don't care about what's happening elsewhere, and their main issue is not the Palestinian issue. Same for the Lebanese people. When we hear Lebanon, people here in the United States or here Iraq, people imagine that these countries and the people in these countries wish the destruction of Israel or want to fight Israel. What many people don't know, that many people in Lebanon and Syria all these countries are just controlled by militias, and they want to get rid of these militias and live in peace with all the region and also with Israel, because they are now looking at the model of the Abraham Accord, the peace that took place between Arab countries and Israel, and they see that these countries that have this tendency to make peace with Israel are all in all more successful countries, more successful communities, and more happy people. Like the people in UAE are absolutely living a better life than the people who are always under the control of the idea that we are in a war situation with Israel.
Wow. And Hadeel, what do you think, coming into the United States' role in all of this? We mentioned, of course, the isolation of it might cause more trouble than benefit, but from your perspective, what would be the ideal scenario when it comes from foreign intervention, or rather aid in the region? How would you like to see the United States really making a pivotal role in this conflict?
Yes, as I think about this also as an American citizen, as a mother for American kids. I go with my kids to their classes. I hang out with the parents of their kids, and I know their priorities. I know their interests, and I know that they don't want to see their kids in the future killed in Iraq or Syria or Lebanon, and I totally agree with them. I totally agree that the United States don't need and should not send more kids, more troops, more people to be killed in the Middle East. The United States foreign policies should be more pragmatic, smarter, try to build alliances, smart alliances with groups, with local groups in the Middle East, either governments or even local groups, because in a country like Syria, we can't build an alliance with the Syrian government, but we were able to build an alliance with the Syrian Democratic Forces that fought ISIS, and that was a very successful model. The United States was able to defeat ISIS through this alliance with this local group. This is a possibility to do in many other countries. In a country like Sudan, in a country like Yemen, it's very possible that we can see allies that can have the support from the United States to preserve the interests of the United States in that very important and strategic region, to make the life of their communities better and defeat the radical groups, but also without big interventions and big wars. That is not going to be a win at all for any country that go in it in the Middle East. And we should absolutely keep the support for the allies that prove to be great and important allies in the Middle East, like Israel, Jordan, and on another degree, like other countries like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and try to always build better alliances with these countries.
What concerns me the most, Hadeel, here is that, if let's say that all of these radical groups are done with, we're over with all of those radical groups. Right now, specifically, with Hamas, let's say that Hamas is, eradicated and there is no more Hamas rule in Gaza. What concerns me is that we might be just, beheading one of the heads of the snake. It's a snake with many heads, and with what happened with ISIS, of course, when ISIS was finished, a lot of people started associating, and with good degree, because there are videos of the terrorists that entered on October 7th to Israel saying we are part of ISIS, we're part of the Islamic group. And so how do you see, of course, my concern is that, and I would like to hear your thoughts, Hadeel, on that concern in itself, but also how do you see that, how can we really truly, solve the root cause of all of these extremist groups? How can we ensure that a long future for my unborn children gets prosperous and moves away from all of these wars and conflicts and terror?
Exactly. The reason why I think the US should not have a military intervention and go through a big war in the Middle East anymore, because I totally believe that there is no absolute win in any conflict in the Middle East against radical groups and terrorist organizations, because unfortunately it's all about the idea. As you said, what happened in October 7th is very similar to what happened to the Yazidis, to the Christians in northeast Syria and in Iraq by ISIS. It's the idea that's spreading and going from a country to another under different slogans and different names. And it's very important to change the ideas, to fight these ideas. What I'm optimistic about is that I see more and more countries in the region now that are fighting radical ideas. And what we're seeing in Saudi Arabia, for example, is amazing. Decades ago, some money that was going out of some Saudi sheikhs, Saudi funders, were enriching and supporting these radical ideas and these radical groups. This is not the case now in Saudi Arabia. And how did it happen? It didn't happen from the bottom. It happened from the leadership. The leadership imposed this totally new system in Saudi Arabia that doesn't tolerate at all, not even 0% with radical and extremist ideas. And this is what should happen in many other Arab countries. The change, the progressive change, the opposition for radical ideas should come from above. And the United States can support the governments to do so, to impose this change that has zero tolerance with any radical ideas, even with anti-Semitism that still exists and prosper in the Arab countries. And unfortunately, many Arab youth took it with them now to the West, took it with them to Europe. As you know, more than 2 million refugees went to Europe during the last years. So all this anti-Semitism, these radical ideas is now spreading in the world, and it's not only in the Arab countries. So the change should happen from above. And by the way, this is what we're trying to do in Jusoor News. In Jusoor News, we are celebrating the progressive ideas. We are celebrating the positive change. We are celebrating the communities that celebrate women, minorities, and we're trying to explain to our Arab viewers how open ideas, how liberalism, how accepting others is always a positive way to improve your community. And this is part of what we're trying to do. Unfortunately, we don't see a lot of work from the American diplomacy on this aspect, the aspect of trying to spread this positive vision in the Arab world. All the efforts, all the money in the American diplomacy is being put only in hard politics, in the relations with the governments. We don't see a lot of work on the youth. And by the way, this is something that Russia and China are doing today. China is working very hard on its media outlets in the Arabic language, and of course to spread the conspiracy theories, to spread the ideas that resonate with the oppressive regime in China. Same for Russia. Russia Today in Arabic is one of the widely viewed Arabic networks in the region, while its American equivalent Al Hurra is unfortunately a very weak network. And this is what we are trying to the vacuum that we're trying to fill here in Jusoor News.
Yes, and for my audience, I'll make sure to add all of the information for them to reach you and read you at Jusoor News, and for them to get that fresh perspective, one that it's optimistic in terms of liberal values, freedom, uplifting the community rather than just focusing on the wrong things and the propaganda. And so, Hadeel, as we begin to wrap up, it's been a very enlightening conversation, honestly. Myself also unfortunately not being that aware of the conflicts that are happening in Sudan as well. I thank you for that, and I will make sure that I will tune more into your work as well to be more, informed about what's happening. As you look into the future, Hadeel, of not only the Middle East, not only journalism, but in terms of geopolitics, in terms of global peace, what is your vision of the future? What is your ideal scenario in the next, let's discuss, how the Israel-Gaza war ends, how the Sudan conflict also ends. How do you see, us building that prosperous future, building upon what you mentioned previously?
I think first what we need to end the war like the one in Sudan, in the long war like the one in Yemen, I'll speak later about Gaza, is to see recognition and believe here in Washington, D.C. in the idea that winning the global competition with China, with Russia, preventing Putin from going to other wars in Europe or elsewhere, is to also focus and not ignore or forget about Africa and the Middle East, because again, these are very important and key tools in the hands of China and its allies to win in this competition with the United States. So when we think about the aspects of competition with China, we should keep in mind that the Middle East and Africa are very important components. This way, we'll have time to spend and efforts to spend on the war that's happening in Sudan. And I agree with the people of Sudan. The United States has a lot of tools, a lot of ways to pressure the parties in Sudan to stop fighting and to stop the conflict and to respect human rights and the lives of the humans and civilians in Sudan. This is how I see it. And for the war in Gaza, Israel is in a very dangerous position. Yes, Israel has allies and friends in the region today. Arab countries more and more Arab countries are in peace with Israel and even have many levels of relations with Israel. But these Arab countries are also under fire from Iran-backed militias, and unfortunately, they are now resorting to China to solve their issues and the threats that Iran is posing upon them. So they can do a lot to help Israel. The United States is the main supporter that should continue to support Israel as the only country that can prevent a genocide against the Israeli people, not only from Hamas but also from Iran militias that are everywhere now in the region, and that we ignored for a very long time and let them grow in power and influence in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. So Israel should win this war if we want the positive values to win and prevail in the Middle East.
Wow, Hadeel, thank you so much. And one last question is regarding Europe. You mentioned the immigration that's happening in Europe, and so what are you seeing across Europe? What are some of the concerns, or also the good things as well, not only the bad things, but what are you seeing in Europe, and how do you see the future of Europe playing out as well?
I think Europe was very generous to accept big numbers of refugees, and a big part of them are from my country, Syria. On the personal level, I see that those who went to Europe, especially those who went in a younger age to Europe, were very lucky, are managing to build a great life in Europe. The Middle East is very rich in human resources, smart people, successful and hardworking people who made it to Europe and making great lives there. So on a personal level, it's a very positive thing for people who made it to a great country like Sweden or Germany. But unfortunately also because some of the waves were very chaotic, some of the waves of refugees were very chaotic and people were not vetted. A lot of people with radical affiliations made it as well to Europe. We saw a lot of terrorist attacks taking place in France, Germany, other places, a lot of unfortunate things happening in these communities due to the radical ideas that came to Europe. This is a very alarming situation about the future of Europe and the future of humanity in general. And this brings me back again to the idea of fighting and combating radical ideas. We want to stop spreading these radical ideas, and we should think of working from on the grassroots on changing these ideas in the Middle East. Arabic language is a very important language. A lot of people speak Arabic language, and we should have more information, more content in the Arabic language that explain why we should fight anti-Semitism, why we should fight ISIS and Al-Qaeda rhetoric, and stop it from spreading and going from generation to another. Because who knows where is the next conflict that's going to erupt in the Middle East, and that's going to send more thousands and thousands of refugees to Europe. And the environment where the Arab youth are growing now in countries like Syria and Yemen is not a healthy environment at all, and we want to work on those people for the best for the world.
Wow, yes, Hadeel. And listen, I'll try to make my best to spread this interview with my audience and also expand it upon new audiences as well. Hadeel, thank you so much for joining me. I hope to host you again soon, because there's a lot that we can unpack more. And with that, is there anything else that's on your mind that you would like to mention, or do you think that we covered enough here for a second round in the future?
Thank you for having me, Alex. I watched many episodes of your interviews, very interesting, and I think that's it. Thank you for all the great questions.
Thank you, Hadeel. I hope to see you in the future.
Sure. Same here.